Do you know what it feels like to be beaten until your own bones beg you to stop breathing? To hide your bruises behind long sleeves and your silence behind a fake smile? At 67, I wasn't planning to live, I was planning to die quietly. But something happened. A miracle. A shift. The same man who used to beat me now wears an apron in my hotel, taking orders from guests and mopping floors. And my son, the one who spat in my face when I asked to live with him? He calls me every day now, asking for a loan to save his sinking company. I didn't get lucky. I got smart. And if you're watching this, I want you to know you're not alone. Like, share, subscribe. Because today, I'm going to tell you exactly how I turned my pain into power. I'm Lila Emerson, 67 years old, born and raised in Kansas. And until last year, I was a woman with no voice, no home, and no hope. I was married to the same man for 42 years, Edward Emerson. To the outside world, he was charming, well-dressed, and had a clean record. But behind closed doors, he was a monster in human skin. The first time he hit me, I was 23, pregnant. He didn't like how I looked fat in my maternity dress. I remember that slap like a thunderclap, hot, loud, and humiliating. But I stayed. I always stayed. Because back then, a woman with no money, no degree, and a baby on the way didn't have choices. Or so I believed. By 67, the beatings had become routine. I had broken ribs twice, a fractured wrist, a tooth knocked out. And the worst part? My own son, Jason, laughed when he saw me on the floor once. Mom, maybe if you learned to shut up, he wouldn't need to teach you a lesson. That sentence haunted me more than the pain. My home wasn't a home. It was a battlefield where I lost every day. He'd take my pension money, force me to cook for his poker buddies. And when I'd ask to turn on the heat in winter, he'd spit, "Die cold if you want." Cheaper for me. I prayed to God each night to take me quietly in my sleep. But God had something else in store for me. I remember that Thanksgiving like it was yesterday. The turkey was dry. Edward said so, loudly, in front of Jason and his wife, Karen. Can't you do anything right, Lila? 67 years old and still useless. He didn't whisper it. He wanted me to feel it, every letter of the word useless like glass pressed into my skin. I stayed quiet, slicing the pie I spent 5 hours baking, even though my arthritis was flaring so badly I couldn't grip the knife without shaking. I smiled, nodded, like I always did. That's what you learn to do after 4 decades of being told your worth is less than the plate you serve on. But something changed that day. Jason had just started a business, a flashy real estate thing in Phoenix, and he'd invited Edward to invest. I offered to pitch in from my tiny savings, thinking maybe it would bring us closer. He laughed. "Don't embarrass us, Ma. What are you gonna give, your food stamps?" Karen giggled. Then Edward threw the pie on the floor. It splattered like my dignity. "You ruin everything you touch," he shouted, grabbing me by the wrist. Before I could even blink, I was on the floor. The edge of the table struck my cheek. Warm blood soaked my collar. And all Jason said was, "Dad, not now." She's bleeding on the carpet. They left me there. No hospital. No apology. Just silence as the door slammed and I sat bleeding into my sweater. I crawled into the bathroom, stared at the reflection of a woman I didn't recognize, purple bruises under both eyes, blood on her lips, and worst of all, a kind of empty look that only comes when you've finally accepted that no one's coming to save you. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I remember what I dreamed. A dream where I stood behind a hotel front desk, wearing a silk blazer, my hair silver and proud, my voice strong. Edward was there, mopping floors. Jason was at the door, begging for a loan. It was a dream, but it was also the first time in years I woke up with something more than fear. I woke up with rage. And maybe, just maybe, that's how a miracle begins. I want to say I left that day, that I packed my bags, walked out the door, and never looked back. But that would be a lie. And I promised you I'd tell you the truth, the raw, ugly truth that so many women over 60 carry in silence. I stayed. Even after bleeding on the floor, after being humiliated in front of my own son, I stayed. Because where would I go? My name wasn't on the house. Edward made sure of that. Every piece of mail, every deed, every account, his. He used to joke, "You're just a guest in my life, Lila." And I believed him. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a partner. I was a ghost in an apron. I had no income except my social security. No friends. Edward isolated me from them years ago. And Jason? He had already made it clear I was nothing more than an unpaid maid who'd lived past her prime. So I stayed, limping around the house with a split lip and a towel pressed to my cheekbone. I cleaned the blood out of the carpet, the same carpet Jason was so concerned about. I remember standing in front of the mirror again a few nights later, trying to apply concealer to hide the bruises. It didn't help. It never did. Makeup can't cover what gets etched into your soul. That night, Edward came in drunk, reeking of whiskey and cigar smoke. I'd made stew. He took one bite and spat it out. Tastes like you poured it from your veins. Then he dragged the pot off the stove and dumped it into the sink while it was still boiling. The steam hit my hands. I screamed. He told me to shut up or get out. I wrapped my burned hands in cold rags and went to bed hungry. And that was when I realized something chilling. I had become less than human in my own home. I wasn't even Lila anymore. I was just the woman who cooked, and bled, and disappeared into silence. But here's where the story turns. Because sometimes, when the world beats you into the dirt, something inside you starts to crawl. It's not loud. It's not brave. But it's alive. And it whispers, "You deserve more." I didn't wake up that morning planning to take anything. I just wanted to breathe without pain. But sometimes, the smallest act of rebellion becomes the first domino that knocks the whole wall down. Edward was out playing cards with his old war buddies. He always left the liquor cabinet open on those nights, thinking I wouldn't dare touch it. But I didn't want whiskey. I wanted access to something, anything, he thought I couldn't reach. That's when I found it. An old green lockbox shoved behind the canned goods in the pantry. Inside were 2 bank statements, both with his name, but one was new. An account I didn't know existed. A side fund, he called it, in a scribbled sticky note addressed to Jason. "Use this if I kick it, don't tell your mother." It wasn't much by some people's standards. But to a woman like me, living on fear and burnt stew, it was freedom. $18,422. 67, I wrote it down. Quietly. Every digit. I didn't take a penny, not yet. But that night, I Googled something I never dared before: how to open a business over 60. Then, grants for women after domestic abuse. And for the first time in decades, I saw something that brought tears to my eyes. A forum post from a woman named Judith, 65. Beaten, discarded, left for dead, until she started a bakery in Vermont. "The world doesn't stop for us, ladies," she wrote. "But we can make it turn our way." I don't know what possessed me to comment, but I did. I typed, "I'm Lila. 67, I want to start something too. But I'm scared." 5 minutes later, Judith replied, "Lila, then you're alive. And that's enough." That night, I cried harder than I'd cried in years. Not from pain, not from fear, but because someone saw me. I wasn't invisible anymore. And when Edward came home, yelling about how his buddies cheated at poker, I didn't flinch. I didn't cook. I didn't even look at him. I went to bed. It was the smallest act of rebellion. But it felt like I had just stolen myself back. 3 weeks after I dared to imagine a different life, I got bold. Not loud bold. Quiet bold, the kind of courage you hide inside your coat pocket. I visited the local library when Edward was out, used one of their old computers, and applied for a senior business training program funded by a nonprofit out in Denver. They offered a free 3-week course, online, flexible hours, focused on women over 60 looking to re-enter the workforce. I didn't expect a response, but I got one. A woman named Dana called me from the foundation. Kind voice. Said she'd seen my application and was moved by it. She mailed me a packet with information and even included a small card, white with gold letters, the Phoenix Program, for women ready to rise. I pressed it between the pages of my Bible like it was scripture. I didn't tell anyone. Not a soul. Except Judith, in our little online group. But Edward must have noticed something. Maybe I smiled too much. Maybe I didn't jump when he slammed the door. Maybe he just sensed I was slipping from his grasp. Because one Sunday afternoon, while folding laundry, I made the mistake of leaving the Bible on the table. He picked it up and flipped through it like a man searching for proof of betrayal. When he found the card, I saw his eyes darken. "What's this, Lila?" he asked. I tried to lie. A church thing. He didn't buy it. Not for a second. "You trying to sneak around behind my back? Get a job." He held the card between two fingers like it was filth. "I just wanted to learn," I whispered. "Just a little program." He didn't yell. He just walked over and took my hand. Calm. Too calm. Then he bent my fingers backward. I heard the first snap before I felt it. I screamed. He pushed me to the floor, stepped over me, and walked out the door like it was any other Sunday. I laid there, shaking, two fingers swollen and crooked. My right hand, my writing hand, useless. That night, I sat in bed, cradling my mangled hand, and opened Judith's message again. She had sent me something earlier that week. I hadn't read it yet. It said, "Don't stop now. If he's hurting you worse, it means he knows you're winning." I wept until dawn. And by morning, I made a vow. He could break my bones, but I'd make damn sure he'd live long enough to watch me rise. It's funny how people assume we're too old to change. That 67 means you're finished. But sometimes, the oldest trees still have roots strong enough to split concrete. I couldn't use my fingers for weeks after Edward broke them. No doctor. No hospital. I knew what they'd ask. I'd seen enough crime shows to know. And truthfully, I was too afraid they wouldn't believe me. That they'd look at a wrinkled old woman with a busted hand and think she probably fell. So I did what I always did. I fixed myself. I wrapped my fingers, iced them, cried through the nights, but I didn't stop. I took a metal spoon from the drawer, taped it to my palm with duct tape and gauze, and practiced tapping keys on the old laptop I bought from a thrift store using money I'd secretly tucked away over the years. 3 letters a minute, then 5, then 10. I enrolled in Dana's Phoenix program and told them I had mobility issues. They said I was brave, but I didn't feel brave. I felt desperate. I'd hide the laptop inside the heating vent behind the bed when Edward was home. I'd study grant applications under a blanket with a flashlight. My fingers throbbed like drums every time I typed. But every keystroke was a small rebellion. A tiny war cry from a woman no one thought was worth hearing. Jason called during that time. He needed Edward's signature for a property deal. I heard him say, "Don't let Mom answer. I don't want to waste time explaining things to the old bat." I smiled. Let him laugh now. Soon, he'd be dialing my number for something he'd never expect. That week, I submitted a proposal. An idea I had whispered to myself at night like a prayer. A senior-owned boutique bed and breakfast. Run by women like me survivors. A place that felt like home, not a shelter. A place with soft beds, fresh soup, and no raised voices. I called it the Velvet Hearth. I didn't tell Edward. But one night, I looked at him across the kitchen table as he slurped his stew and grumbled about politics. And I thought to myself, you're eating in the future hotel of your boss, Edward. I almost didn't live to see my miracle. Because right before the breakthrough came, he tried to erase me for good. It was the night my application got accepted. Dana called me herself. She said the Velvet Hearth had been approved for a micro-grant $10,000 to start with, mentorship included, and a chance to present to donors at a women's empowerment event in Chicago. I couldn't believe it. I sat there, staring at the wall, the phone shaking in my hand. "Lila, Dana said gently, "You're doing this. You're really doing this." I wanted to scream with joy, but all I could do was whisper, "Thank you." Then, I made a mistake. I left the confirmation email open on the laptop. I was so caught in the miracle that I forgot I was still in the cage. Edward came home early that day, and he saw it. He didn't scream. He didn't punch. He didn't say a word. He calmly asked me to come downstairs and check the boiler. Said it was leaking. My heart dropped. I should have run, but I'd spent 42 years being obedient. And obedience is a hard habit to break. When I stepped into the basement, he shoved me hard. I fell on the steps, my hips smacking the concrete. He slammed the door shut and turned the lock. "I warned you," he said through the wood. "You couldn't stay in your place. So now you can rot in it." I screamed. He turned on the washing machine upstairs to drown me out. No windows. No phone. Just pitch black and cold. That basement smelled like mildew and bleach. The concrete was rough beneath me, and my wrist throbbed from the fall. I lay there, hours ticking by, wondering if this would be how I died. Not from age or illness, but locked away like an animal because I dared to dream. He didn't bring food or water. On the second night, I began hallucinating. I thought I saw Judith sitting in the corner, smiling with tears in her eyes. "Don't give up now," I heard her say. "Not when you're so close." On the third day, he finally opened the door. Not to free me, just to throw a tray of old leftovers on the floor. "You're lucky I didn't bury you in there," he said. That's when it snapped. Not my bones. My spirit. Because at that moment, I realized something terrifying and freeing. He was afraid. He saw what I was becoming. And that's why he tried to bury me before I could bloom. He didn't know I kept a second key. It was hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Something I stashed away years ago after he locked me out of the house one winter night during a snowstorm because I talked back. I had been outside in the cold for 5 hours, fingers turning blue. That was the day I decided I'd never let a lock keep me powerless again. So, when he left for his weekly poker night, so smug, so sure I was broken, I waited, listening for his truck to disappear down the gravel road. Then I pried that brick loose with the bent handle of an old broom and found my freedom key covered in dust and spiderwebs. I limped up the basement stairs. My wrist, still tender from the fall, throbbed as I turned the lock slowly, praying it wouldn't creak too loud. Click! The door opened. The hallway smelled like beer and old rage. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my purse, my Bible, and the Phoenix program folder. That was all I took. No photos. No clothes. Not even the necklace Jason gave me when he was 10. That version of me, the woman who kept pieces of people who destroyed her, was staying behind. I left the house barefoot, walking through the backyard in silence like a ghost escaping its own grave. It was midnight. Cold. And every step on the gravel felt like fire under my feet. But I didn't stop. Because I had somewhere to go. Judith had sent me an address. A women's co-op in Colorado. A place where women like me, older, bruised, forgotten, were building lives from the ashes. I walked to the bus station with $42 in cash and a wrist that couldn't hold a cup of water. I looked like hell. But I had something no one could see, a dream. I bought a one-way ticket to Denver. Fell asleep on the bus with my bag clutched to my chest. Woke up when the sun hit the Rockies, and I saw them rising like giants outside the window. It was the first sunrise I'd seen without fear in 42 years. And that moment, I swear to you, it changed me. Because the woman who stepped off that bus, she wasn't Lila the victim anymore. She was Lila Emerson. Survivor. Builder. And soon boss. The women's co-op wasn't fancy. It was a weather-worn old building in Denver, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, with faded pink shutters and a broken porch light. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. They didn't ask me why I had no suitcase. They didn't ask why my wrist was wrapped in a dish towel. They just looked at me, really looked, and said, "Welcome home." A woman named Rosa led me to a small room with a cot, a desk, and a window that opened to the mountains. She handed me a towel, a fresh pair of socks, and a small meal. She said, "You don't owe us anything. But if you want to talk, we're here." I stayed quiet that first night. But the next morning, after my first full night of sleep in decades, I sat in their circle and told my story. Not all of it, just enough. Enough to see the other women lean in. Enough for one of them, Marcia, 71 years old, still healing from a broken collarbone her son gave her, to reach out and squeeze my hand. We were strangers, but we were the same. The director, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Camille, sat down with me later that week and said, "You're the oldest newcomer we've had in a while." I braced myself for pity, but she didn't give me any. She said, "Good. The older ones fight harder." I showed her my folder, The Velvet Hearth. She read every page like it was a treasure map. When she finished, she looked up and said, "We're going to help you build this. Not for you. For all of us." I started attending business classes in the evenings, typing one-handed while my wrist healed. The Phoenix program covered most of my expenses. The co-op covered the rest. And slowly, brick by metaphorical brick, I began building something. Back home, Edward was calling Jason, furious. She ran off, took something. I know it, but I didn't take his money. I took my voice. I took my fire. I took my life back. And every day I woke up, I repeated the same words before I put my feet on the floor. Build. Don't beg. 3 months into my new life, I still caught myself flinching at loud voices. Still reached for the stove before realizing I didn't have to ask permission to use it. Trauma isn't something you just move past. It's a shadow that follows you even when the sun comes out. But something else followed me too now, momentum. The women at the co-op believed in the Velvet Hearth. Judith, Rosa, Camille, Marcia, we held brainstorming sessions over soup and biscuits like we were plotting a revolution. And in a way, we were. Camille connected me with a woman named Teresa who ran a social impact fund. She read my proposal, then invited me to speak at a small donors' luncheon. I almost said no. Public speaking? Me? The woman who used to tremble when her husband walked into a room? But Camille looked me in the eyes and said, "You've spent your life being silent. It's time to make noise." I wore a borrowed blazer, taped a spoon to my hand again so I could click through the presentation slides. My voice cracked on the first sentence, but steadied with the second. And when I told them the truth that the Velvet Hearth wasn't just a business idea, it was a lifeline for women who had nowhere else to go, one of the donors cried. After the event, Teresa walked over and handed me a check for $5,000. Payable to Lila Emerson. I held it in both hands like it might vanish. No man's name on it. No cosigner. No permission needed. It was mine. Later that night, I stared at that check under my reading lamp and whispered, "You used to clean toilets for men who hated you. And now, you're building rooms for women who need healing." Back in Kansas, Edward was unraveling. He called the bank and learned I hadn't taken any money. He called Jason and ranted that I was probably hiding in a church somewhere begging for scraps. Jason, according to Rosa's sister who still lived in our old town, had problems of his own now. His real estate venture had flopped. Lawsuits. Investors pulling out. No one trusted him after a few shady land deals went public. The irony? They needed me now. But I was finally learning what it felt like to not need them. I never thought I'd see that house again. The peeling paint, the rusted gutters, the porch swing Edward never fixed because it wasn't worth the effort. All of it looked smaller now. Less like a fortress. More like a tomb. I went back not to cry, not to remember. I went back to buy it. You see, the market had shifted. Fast. Our little Kansas town was drying up, factories closed, young people moved away, and property values had plummeted. I heard about it from Marcia's cousin, who still worked in a local realtor's office. And wouldn't you know it? Edward had listed the house. Jason's business was sinking, and Edward needed cash fast. But no one was biting. Word had gotten around that the Emerson house was cursed. Neighbors whispered about the screaming, the sirens, the lights never turning on in certain rooms. So I made a call, used a lawyer through the co-op, and filed the paperwork under a trust name. And just like that, the house was mine. He didn't know. Not yet. But I needed to see it. Stand in it. Touch the walls that once held me prisoner and remind myself I wasn't that woman anymore. I walked through the door on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, armed with keys and silent rage. The air still smelled like dust and loneliness. The basement steps creaked under my feet. I stood at the bottom, where he locked me for 3 days. I looked at the wall where I hid the key, and I whispered, "You didn't bury me. You planted me." Then I laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that shakes something loose inside you. The kind you only earn after surviving hell. Upstairs, I ran my fingers across the kitchen table, the one where he used to belittle me while chewing steak. I imagined him now, pacing in a cheap motel room, bills piling up, wondering why no one would answer his calls. The house was empty. But I wasn't. I was full for the first time in years. I left the house that day with a plan. Not to live in it. Not to rent it. No. I was going to renovate it. Turn the place of my nightmares into a sanctuary for women escaping their own. The velvet hearth would have its first branch right there, in the house where I was once destroyed. And the best part? Edward would soon find out who his new landlord was. I didn't knock. I waited. Outside that motel in Wichita, parked across the street, watching the sagging curtains and flickering neon sign that read, "Westerly Inn, weekly rates available." It was the kind of place people go when they have nowhere else to run. Fitting. Edward had called me 3 times the week before. Blocked number, of course. Voicemails, all the same. "Lila, if you're still alive, call me. Jason's in trouble. We need help." We. The same man who locked me in a basement and said I was better off rotting? Now he wanted we? I didn't answer. I sent Camille instead. She walked in with her clipboard and her practiced calm and offered Edward a job, housekeeping at a senior women's retreat. Full-time. Living quarters included. He didn't know she was mine. She said he was skeptical at first, until she mentioned it paid cash and included meals. He took it. And that's how Edward Emerson, former king of his household, who once made me scrub blood from the floor with vinegar and shame, became a waiter, a cleaner, a man in a borrowed uniform folding towels with trembling hands. When I walked into the velvet hearth 2 days later, wearing a burgundy silk blouse and my new name badge, founder and director, Lila Emerson, he was scrubbing the lobby floor. He looked up. The mop slipped from his hand. His mouth fell open. And for the first time in 42 years, he was speechless. "Welcome," I said, walking past him. "You missed a spot." He didn't speak. Didn't yell. Just stood there, red-faced and hollow-eyed, like he was seeing a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. I was the woman he tried to erase. Now signing paychecks in the house, where he once bruised my ribs and called it discipline. Jason called later that night. Desperate. His company had collapsed. Investors bailed. He'd heard about the women's resort and wanted to know if I'd help refinance his mortgage. I said, "Send me your application. I'll have my staff review it." Because power doesn't come from revenge alone. It comes from knowing that the people who once made you kneel now call you ma'am. The success of the velvet hearth spread faster than I expected. Local news picked up the story. 67-year-old survivor turns abuser's home into healing retreat. They didn't mention Edward's name. Legally, I kept it vague. But people knew. Small towns always know. One afternoon, a group of women visited from a neighboring state. They came for our tea circle, where we read stories, shared healing rituals, and swapped laughter like currency. After the session, one woman stayed behind. Tall, gray streak in her dark braid. Late 60s, maybe 70. eyes sharp as razors dulled by sorrow. "Are you Lila?" she asked, her voice like gravel and wind. "Yes," I said, smiling. She handed me a letter, folded 3 times, yellowed at the creases. "I think you should know. He hurt others. Not just you." I sat down. My knees went weak. She never said Edward's name. She didn't have to. The letter was from 1987. A police report that never went anywhere. Her daughter, 15 years old at the time, had accused Edward of cornering her behind the bleachers at a baseball game. He was coaching Jason's team that year. The daughter had bruises, but no witnesses. And no one wanted to believe a teenage girl over a respected family man. She said, "My daughter's 48 now. Still struggles with trust. I always wondered what became of him. Then I saw you on the news." I held the letter in trembling hands. The rage inside me boiled into something volcanic. But also, clarity. Edward wasn't just cruel to me. He was a predator in sheep's clothing. And I had let him mop the floors of my sanctuary. He had to go. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I did something more terrifying to a man like Edward. I called a meeting with Camille. "Reassign him," I said. "Let him work off-site. Minimal pay. Basic labor. Let the man who once controlled women's lives disappear under the weight of their silence." We demoted him the next morning. No more lobby shifts. No name tag. No uniform. Just a rake, a list of outdoor chores, and a portable toilet to clean. He didn't argue. Didn't speak. He just nodded. I watched from the window as he dragged bags of mulch across the gravel. A man reduced not by violence, but by irrelevance. The woman with the braid came back weeks later. Her daughter joined her. They stayed for a weekend in the room where I once wept into my pillow, praying to be invisible. And, for the first time in her life, that woman's daughter slept peacefully through the night. It was a Sunday. Bright sky, wind brushing the curtains of the front office. The velvet hearth was nearly full. 12 women checked in, each with a story carved into her skin or stitched into her silence. I was reviewing the week's budget when the front door slammed so hard the bell flew off the hook. Jason. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Still wore that designer belt. Still walked like the world owed him a spotlight. But his face, thinner. Paler. Eyes frantic, voice tight. "Mom," he snapped. "We need to talk." I didn't stand. I kept writing. "I've left you messages," he said, stepping closer. "My mortgage is underwater. I need capital. I'm your son." I looked up, calmly. "You were also the one who told me I was a burden," I replied. "Said I should have died cold to save you money. Remember?" He flinched, but only for a second. Then his mouth twisted into that smirk I used to mistake for confidence. "You're seriously not gonna help me? After everything I did for you? All those years Dad paid for your life, and you, what? You run off, start this little trauma circus, and now you think you're better than us." Trauma circus. That's what he called the sanctuary I built with broken hands and borrowed time. I stood up slowly. "Jason, I cleaned your vomit when you had the flu. I fed you when I didn't eat. I bled from your father's fists while you watched and laughed. You don't get to rewrite history because now you're broke." He scoffed. "You're a parasite, Mom." I walked around the desk, stared him dead in the eye. "No, Jason. I was a host. And I stopped feeding you." He tried to guilt me. Tried to shout. Tried to demand. Said he'd go public with family secrets if I didn't help him. I smiled. "You're welcome to try," I said, handing him a brochure. "Just make sure to spell the hotel name right. Any press is good press." He left. Slamming the door again, only this time, it bounced back. Didn't even shut fully. Like him, unsealed, unrooted, undone. Later that week, I heard from Camille that Jason tried to apply for a grant under his wife's name. Got denied. Flagged for fraud. I didn't gloat. Didn't celebrate. I just lit a candle in the window. Because maybe one day, he'll understand. You can't build a kingdom out of people you've buried. It was late afternoon when I saw her silhouette on the porch, thin, trembling, holding something wrapped in a faded blue blanket. Karen. I hadn't seen her since the Thanksgiving she laughed when Edward called me useless and Jason left me bleeding on the floor. That laugh had haunted me for months. It was the kind of sound that makes you question whether your pain was ever real to others. But now, she looked like a different woman. Hair unbrushed, dark circles under her eyes, hands clutching the baby like a lifeline. "Can we talk?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like a ghost afraid to enter holy ground. We sat in the lobby. No one else around. The baby, a little boy, slept in her arms. She stared at the floor for what felt like forever. Then finally, she spoke. "Jason left us 6 months ago. Walked out when the money dried up. I didn't come to ask for help. I came to apologize." I said nothing. Let the silence hold her accountable. "I thought you were weak," she continued. "Jason told me you were lazy, that you faked everything, that you ruined his dad. And I believed him. I joined in. I laughed. But now, I see him in my son's tantrums. In his eyes when he gets angry. I'm scared of what I brought into this world." She looked up at me then, eyes brimming with something that didn't exist the last time I saw her, humility. Then she pulled a small folder from her purse and slid it across the table. "I filed for divorce. And I need a job. Anywhere. Please. I'll scrub floors. I'll wash sheets. Just don't turn me away." I stared at that baby. Tiny fingers curled like mine used to be after Edward broke them. Part of me wanted to say no, to remind her of her laughter while I bled, to let her feel what I felt, powerless. But I didn't, because revenge might feel good for a minute. But change? That changes the world. I offered her a probationary housekeeping role, with one condition. "You look every woman here in the eye," I said, "and you never, ever look down on another person again." She nodded, crying now. "I won't. I swear." As she left the room to settle in, I sat there for a long time, holding her divorce folder in one hand, and her baby's name card in the other. Liam Edward Jason. 3 names, each one with a scar. But maybe this child, this innocent piece of broken legacy, could grow up under a roof built by survivors. Maybe that's how the healing begins. It started with a phone call from a reporter. "Ms. Emerson, this is Rachel Tate from the National Light. We're doing a feature on elder abuse recovery programs, and your name came up repeatedly. Would you be open to an interview?" I hesitated. My instinct was to stay small, safe, quiet. But I remembered Judith's words, "If you have the mic, speak loud enough for the women who can't." So I said yes. The article came out 2 weeks later. From Survivor to Sanctuary, how Lila Emerson turned a house of horror into a haven of healing. My photo was on the cover. Silver hair, calm eyes, standing in front of the renovated porch that used to echo with my cries. They didn't name Edward, but they described him, a prominent figure in a Midwestern town. Former Little League coach. Accused in a sealed 1987 case. Never charged. And then it happened. Emails, phone calls, old neighbors, former students. Women who had long buried their pain began to speak. 3 more victims came forward, now grown women with children of their own. One of them said, "I didn't even realize what he did to me until I read your article. I thought I'd imagined it." Another said she dropped out of school at 16 just to get away from his coaching. The dam broke. Social media picked it up. Edward Emerson's name was finally out there. He tried to deny it at first, tried to threaten legal action. But the press didn't care, and neither did the women who had been waiting 30, 40 years to say, "He hurt me too." He was called in for questioning. No charges, yet statutes, loopholes, but his name? It was mud. He stopped showing up to the job I gave him. Rosa found him drunk in the alley behind the velvet hearth one night, mumbling about how everything used to be his. We didn't call the cops. We called an ambulance. Because even monsters deserve to sit with their ruin sober. He's living in a facility now. A state-run home with linoleum floors and nurses who've read the headlines. Jason? Gone. Moved to Florida. Changed his last name. And me? I was invited to speak at a national summit on domestic recovery programs. Me, the woman who once hid bruises under long sleeves, now standing at a podium in Washington, D.C., with a microphone and a sea of survivors watching. I ended my speech with this. To every woman who thinks she's too old to matter, you are not a memory. You are a movement. And they stood for me. All of them. Even Karen, holding little Liam in the back row. It came by courier. A thick white envelope with a gold seal, hand-delivered to the velvet hearth by a suited young man who called me Ms. Emerson with respect in his eyes. I thought it was a donation letter, maybe an award. Instead, it was an offer. $2. For a million. From a national real estate group looking to franchise women-run healing centers. They'd seen the article, watched the news segment, read the survivor testimonials pouring in from across the country. And they wanted me. They wanted the velvet hearth in 12 cities. Chicago, Austin, Detroit, Seattle. All built in my vision, all funded under my name. I sat at my desk, rereading the contract with trembling hands. My fingers, once broken and taped together, now hovered above the signature line of something I never imagined I'd touch, a national legacy. But then Camille walked in. And the look on her face. It wasn't pride. It was grief. I need to talk to you, Lila, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. She closed the office door behind her. And then she told me. Rosa had been speaking to Jason. Secretly. For months. Apparently, after he vanished to Florida, he reached out to her. Claimed he was in recovery, that he wanted to reconnect. She'd believed him, maybe saw the lost little boy in him. And she told him things. Small things at first, my speaking schedule, my plans for expansion, even a few internal budget reports. I felt like the floor shifted under my feet. Not Rosa. Not the woman who helped me find my voice again. Not the woman who wrapped my wrist in bandages and held me when I cried after the basement. Camille placed a hand over mine. She didn't do it with malice. But Jason's using her. He pitched a version of the velvet hearth to a hedge fund 2 weeks ago. A copycat. A cold wave washed over me. All this time, my own son had been lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting, stealing pieces of my rebirth to build a facade of his own. I didn't scream, didn't sob. I closed the folder. I stood up, and I walked to Rosa's room. When I knocked, she opened the door with eyes already full of regret. I'm sorry, she whispered. He said he missed you. I didn't know, I know, I said. That's what he's best at. Making women believe in men who never deserved our faith. I didn't fire her. I didn't shout. I asked her to step down from leadership, to stay as a guest until she decided whether she wanted to heal or repeat history. Then I called the real estate group. I accept, I told them. On one condition. They asked what? That my son is never allowed near the brand. You see his name, his email, his face? You walk away. That's the only deal I sign. They agreed. Because I wasn't just building a business. I was protecting a truth. That the women who were once discarded would never again be handed back to the people who broke them. The second location of the Velvet Hearth opened in St. Louis on a rainy spring morning. It was smaller than our flagship home in Kansas, but it had warmth in every corner. The walls were painted in soft hues of lavender and cream. Each room bore the name of a woman who had rebuilt her life inside our walls. There was a Judith suite, a Camille room, even one named the Phoenix. We had a soft launch gathering. No press. Just our community, women who carried years of silence in their bones and had finally found breath again. The ribbon cutting was held in the courtyard, beneath a cherry blossom tree we'd planted for new beginnings. And that's when I saw him. wheeled in by a nurse, a blanket draped over his legs. Edward. Thinner. Sunken. Smaller. His body had aged fast, too fast. His hands shook. His lips were pale. He wore a state-issued coat and shoes too big for his feet. The air shifted. I heard a few gasps. Someone behind me asked, "Is that?" I nodded. Yes. He was pushed forward slowly until he stopped about 10 feet from where I stood, holding the gold scissors in my hand. He looked up at me, eyes dull but clearer than I remembered. And for a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then he opened his mouth. "Lila," he rasped, barely above a whisper. "Please. Please. Not, 'I'm sorry.' Not, 'forgive me.' Just that one word." I stepped forward slowly. The women watched. The nurse shifted nervously, unsure of whether to intervene. I crouched down beside him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed it. I leaned close to his ear and said, with a calm that came from survival, "This place? This peace? It came from everything you tried to destroy." He turned his face to mine. His eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in all our years together, he looked afraid. Not of me, but of himself. "You don't have to carry this anymore," I told him. "But you'll never escape it either. That's your burden now." He opened his mouth again, but no sound came. I stood, nodded at the nurse. "Take him back." As they wheeled him away, I felt the wind brush through my hair like a sigh from the sky itself. I walked back to the ribbon, raised the scissors, and said, loud enough for every woman in the courtyard to hear, "This ribbon isn't just fabric. It's the last thread tying me to the woman I used to be. Today, I cut it. For all of us." Snip. Applause. Tears. Freedom. It was 2:14 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Not because I was in pain, those days were over, but because something inside me still stirred every night. A quiet ache. Not sadness. Not regret. Just memory. Like a knock from the past asking if I still remembered her. And I did. I always did. So I got up, sat by the window of my room at the original velvet hearth. The cherry tree outside was blooming. The porch light flickered just enough to make the petals glow like ghosts. I opened my journal and began to write, not to the press, not to the board, not even to the women who called me ma'am now, but to her, the version of me who stayed, the girl who bled on Thanksgiving, the woman who slept on basement concrete, the ghost who taped a spoon to her hand just to keep typing through the pain. Dear Lila, you won't believe me, but I'm writing this from your future. Not the one you feared, where your body is buried beneath your husband's control, but the one you never dared to imagine. You survived. Not just the beatings, not just the silence, but the shame they made you carry like it was your name. You will one day open a door that is yours, stand behind a desk that is yours, and sign checks that carry only your name. Not his. Not theirs. Yours. You will be called strong, visionary, inspiring. And not one of those words will erase what they did, but they will outshine it. You will help women find their way home to themselves. You will mother those who were never mothered. You will house those who were never safe. You will become the shelter you never had. I'm sorry no one came to save you sooner, but I'm proud you learned to save yourself. Rest easy now. We made it. With love, you. I posted that letter on our community blog the next morning. I almost didn't. It felt too raw, too private. But something told me, let it fly. Within a week, it had been shared over 500,000 times. Women from Wisconsin to Nigeria to Seoul replied with messages like, "This is my story too. I didn't know anyone else felt like this. I'm 63, and tomorrow I'm going to apply for a passport for the first time." I didn't want fame. I wanted freedom. And the beautiful part? Now it was spreading like wildfire. It had been 5 years since I opened the first velvet hearth. We'd grown. 7 homes across the country. Thousands of women walked through our doors, some with broken bones, some with broken trust, some just broken. But every one of them left stronger than she arrived. Some stayed to help. Some moved on to start their own lives. Some sent letters. And a few came back years later with daughters they refused to let suffer as they had. I was sipping chamomile tea one morning in the sunroom of our Colorado branch when Camille came in with a knowing smile. "There's someone here to see you," she said. I stood slowly. My knees weren't what they used to be, but my heart beat steady, and then she walked in. Emma, 28. Hair like fire. Eyes that had seen too much too soon. She had checked into the Kansas house 3 years ago after escaping her husband in the middle of the night with 2 toddlers and a bruise across her jaw. She'd stayed 7 months. Quiet. Careful. Until one day she spoke in group and said, "I don't remember who I am, but I want to meet her." And now she was here, holding a binder, dressed in a fitted blazer. Nervous, but fierce. "I applied for funding," she said. "I want to open a velvet hearth in New Orleans. There's a church there that's closing down. I already have 3 other women ready to run it. I want your blessing." I looked at her, really looked. She didn't need my blessing. She had her own fire now. I walked over to the little cabinet behind my desk, opened the top drawer, took out the master key to our original location. It was old, scratched, but sacred. "I want you to have this," I said. She blinked. "But that's yours." "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "It was never mine. It was always meant to be passed forward." She took it with trembling hands. And I watched her walk out the door with it, shoulders square, chin high. Not a victim. Not a survivor. A builder. I sat alone for a while after she left. Watched the sun cast long beams across the hardwood floor. And then I said softly to the empty room, "If you're watching this right now, if your bones ache from silence, if your scars still burn, if you think you're too old or too late, don't you dare believe it. You are still alive. And that means there is still time to rise." I smiled, clicked the camera off, and poured my tea.